Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analysing the Hindu newspaper dated 23rd of September 2019 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. The first article appears as a lead article on page number 10. The title of the article is The Nationalist Hindrance to the Climate Actions. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of GS Paper 3, Environment, under the subsection Environmental Conservation, Pollution and Degradation. Now, before analyzing this particular article, let us first look into its background. Since the Industrial Revolution, there has been a rapid increase in the concentration of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, leading to the problem of the climate change and global warming. The carbon dioxide emissions have increased to around 411 parts per million, and this has increased by almost around 45% since the pre-industrial levels. The increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases has in turn led to the increase in the average temperature of the earth by almost around 1.1 degrees Celsius since the pre-industrial levels. The last 4 years have been considered to be the hottest years in the history of the earth, and the 20 warmest years have been reported in the last 22 years alone. The increase in the emission of fossil fuels has also led to the problem of the air pollution, wherein according to the Lancet, which is considered to be the leading medical journal across the world, the air pollution has emerged as the world's largest environmental cause for death. On an annual basis, the air pollution has accounted for around 10 million deaths across the world, and 9 out of 10 people actually breathe the polluted air. The problem of climate change and global warming has also led to increase in the extinction of species, which is referred to as the biological annihilation, and it is being stated that presently the sixth mass extinction of the species is underway because of this particular problem. Further, according to IUCN, almost around 25 species across the world are threatened with extinction because of this particular problem. And more importantly, by 2050, it is expected that all the coral reefs, particularly in the tropical waters, would go extinct because of the increase in the temperature. The climate change and global warming has led to increase in the frequency of droughts as well as floods, leading to food insecurity in almost around 51 countries across the world. There has been a greater amount of variation in the Indian monsoons, and this has been accompanied by an increase in the extreme weather events such as droughts and floods, leading to increase in the water stress across the world. Further, the climate change has also led to the increase in the sea level, mainly on account of two reasons. First and foremost, the increase in the global temperature has led to increase in the volume of the oceans, and secondly, the increase in the melting of glaciers due to the global warming has also contributed to the increase in the sea level. And because of such an increase in the sea level, almost around 130 million people would get displaced. And lastly, there has been almost around 30% increase in the acidity of the oceans, leading to an adverse impact on the marine ecosystem. In response to this particular problem of climate change and the global warming, the global community has adopted the Paris Climate Change Deal under the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change. As part of the Paris Climate Change Deal, the member countries have come out with the nationally determined contributions so as to limit the emission of greenhouse gases in order to ensure that the overall increase in the global temperature is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius below the pre-industrial levels. However, some of the countries such as USA, Japan, Mexico, etc., these countries believe that the global efforts to limit the greenhouse gas emission goes against their national interest. This is because these countries believe that if they have to limit their emission of greenhouse gases, then they would have to give up the fossil fuels and instead focus upon the costlier renewable energy projects. Hence, these countries perceive that the limitation on the greenhouse gas emissions would in turn adversely affect their overall economic growth and development. So these countries have built up a perception that if they follow the model of the low carbon growth, then it will adversely affect their national interest. And accordingly, some of the countries have not come out with the genuine efforts in order to combat the problem of the climate change. Now we have to realize that the global threat of climate change and global warming can be countered only through the concerted global effort where every country has to realize that the low carbon growth can fulfill the dual objective of boosting their economic growth and development, but it would also address the problem of the climate change. So, one of the biggest challenges to the concerted global efforts to the climate change problem is the nationalist sentiments, whereby some of the countries have been giving higher amount of preference to the national objectives rather than tackling the problem of the climate change. In this regard, this particular lead article is aptly titled as The Nationalist Hindrance to the Climate Action. This particular lead article highlights that the United Nations Global Climate Action Summit is scheduled to be held today, where member countries would outline their policies and targets to address the problem of the climate change. In this regard, this article discusses as to whether these efforts of the global community are likely to be successful or not. Further, the article also highlights as to what should be the policy stance of India in this particular summit. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we'll discuss about the United Nations Global Climate Action Summit, its agenda, and what should be the policy stance of India in this particular summit. Let us first understand about the United Nations Global Climate Action Summit. As stated before, the member countries have announced the nationally determined contributions in order to limit their emission of greenhouse gases as part of the Paris climate change deal. But the biggest question which arises here is that whether these global efforts are sufficient in order to address the present problem of the climate change and global warming. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in its fifth assessment report, has highlighted that the present efforts undertaken by the global community are insufficient to address the problem of the climate change. Wherein the IPCC has highlighted that the pledges made by the member countries as part of the nationally determined contributions are insufficient to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, meeting the ambitious goal of reducing the global warming needs rapid and far-reaching changes in our energy systems, land use, transportation, as well as the building use. It would require a much sharper and quicker emission cuts by some of the big emitters such as the USA, European Union, China, and so on. So, since these present pledges made by the global community are insufficient to address the problem of climate change, we need to ensure that the countries should have to come up with certain concrete and realistic plans so as to enhance their nationally determined contribution. It is against this particular backdrop the United Nations Secretary General has called for the United Nations Global Climate Action Summit. As part of this particular action summit, the member countries are required to come up with a concrete and realistic plans so as to enhance their nationally determined contributions as announced under the Paris deal. The idea here is that the overall emission of greenhouse gases have to reduce by 45% over the next decade. And by 2050, we need to achieve the net zero emissions of carbon. Now, the net zero emission of carbon essentially means that whatever carbon is emitted from various sources has to be in turn absorbed by various kind of carbon sinks such as the forests. So, under the scenario of net zero emissions, the total amount of carbon emitted would be equal to the total amount of carbon uptake by various kind of carbon sinks. And in order to meet these objectives, the United Nations Global Climate Action Summit has come up with certain priority actions to be undertaken by the member countries. For instance, it has highlighted that the adoption of renewable energy technologies would be quite costly, and accordingly it has highlighted that the member countries have to mobilize the finances from both the public sector as well as the private sector for undertaking investment in the renewable energy projects. Secondly, it has sought to emphasize on the energy transition wherein there has to be a shift from the fossil fuels to more of the renewable energy projects. Thirdly, we also need to focus upon the demand side management wherein we have to focus upon enhancing the energy efficiency of certain energy intensive industries. Similarly, in order to combat the problem of climate change, we have to lay adequate amount of emphasis on promotion of the mass transportation, and we need to design the buildings in such a manner that the overall energy consumptions of the buildings should reduce. Nextly, a large number of developing countries as well as the poor countries have got adversely affected because of the climate change. Hence, we need to focus upon the adaptation so as to reduce the vulnerability of these countries. Lastly, we also need to focus upon certain nature based solutions in order to combat the problem of climate change. For instance, the countries across the world have to go for afforestation so as to increase the carbon sinks across the world. So, if you look at the United Nations Global Climate Action Summit, this particular summit has emphasized on a two-track approach, wherein under the first track, it seeks to lay down the various objectives to be met by the countries, and in the second track, it seeks to lay down the various priority actions to be undertaken by the countries across the world. In response to this particular summit, as well as the problem of climate change and global warming, the global response of the world community as such has remained mixed. For instance, some of the small and mid-sized economies such as the United Kingdom have committed to become carbon neutral by the end of 2050. However, if you look at some of the biggest emitters across the world, the countries such as USA, Mexico, Brazil, Australia and Canada, these countries have decided not to participate in the United Nations Global Climate Action Summit 2019. So we can see clearly here that these countries have placed their national interest over and above the global efforts to combat the problem of the climate change. For instance, the US President Mr. Donald Trump has failed to acknowledge the problem of the climate change, and he has withdrawn the USA from the Paris climate change deal. Similarly, the Brazilian president also believes that the global efforts to combat the problem of climate change would also go against the interest of Brazil. So, this particular nationalism prevailing in these countries has in turn reduced the scope for the concerted global efforts to combat the problem of the climate change. With respect to India, India strictly believes in the principle of the CBDR, which stands for the common but differentiated responsibilities. As part of CBDR, India basically believes that the responsibility to cut the emission of greenhouse gases should be common to all the countries. However, such a responsibility should be differentiated based upon the economic growth of a particular country. More importantly, India also believes that it is the advanced economies which have been responsible for the global emission of the greenhouse gases, and accordingly, these advanced economies should compensate the developing economies as well as the poor economies by transferring the technology as well as finances. So, through the transfer of green technology and finances from the developed economies to the developing economies, the developing economies would be able to address the problem of the climate change. So, in line with its stated position of the common but differentiated responsibilities, India has highlighted the need for the additional finances to be provided by the developed economies for enhancing the global efforts to combat the climate change problem. Now, as discussed before, the nationally determined contributions announced by the member countries are insufficient to address the problem of the climate change. In this regard, the youths across the world are participating in the protest movements against this global inaction. One of the most important youth protest movement which has been in the news recently is the Extinction Rebellion in Europe. Now, this particular group has been pressurizing the governments across the world to become carbon neutral by the end of 2050. This group has also been pressurizing the governments to adopt the greener technologies so as to address the problem of the climate change. Let us now understand as to what should be the policy stance of India at this particular global summit as highlighted in this particular article. We have to realize that India is a country which is highly vulnerable to the climate change problem. In this regard, India must partner with certain like minded countries and pressurize the global community in order to step up their efforts to address the problem of the climate change. Secondly, as discussed before, some of the countries across the world have failed to integrate the low carbon growth model into their development policies. This is because these countries believe that such a growth model would adversely affect their economic growth and development. In this regard, India has to demonstrate to the global community that the integration of the low carbon growth model into the development policies would not only lead to economic growth and development, but it will also help address the problem of the climate change. For example, the government of India is implementing a large number of energy efficiency programs. Now, these energy efficiency programs have not only led to the economic growth and development through the cost savings, but they have also contributed to the global efforts of reducing the emission of carbon dioxide. Further, India has also been able to bring about a rapid transformation of its energy scenario, wherein the share of the renewable energy sector to the overall installed capacity in India has increased to around 21%. So, India has to demonstrate the effects of these policies to the global community so that even other countries could also follow such a growth model. And lastly, with respect to climate change negotiations, India is being viewed as a leader of developing and the poor economies. This article highlights that over a period of time, India should emerge as a truly global climate leader. And in order to emerge as a global climate leader, India has to establish partnership with the countries such as China so as to enable the poor countries, especially in the African continent, to transition from the fossil fuels to more of a low carbon growth model. Based upon our video analysis, a main question for your practice here could be discuss as to how the politics of climate change based upon nationalism is hindering the present global efforts to combat the climate change problem. Also highlight as to what should be the India's policy stance in order to step up the global efforts. Now you can try writing answer to this particular question based upon a video analysis. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 13. The title of the article is India Strikes the Big Ticket LNG Deal. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of GS Paper 2, International Relations under the subsection Bilateral Agreements involving India or affecting India's interest. Prime Minister Modi is on a visit to USA. Now during this particular visit, India's LNG importer Petronet has signed a memorandum of understanding to invest around $2.5 billion in the natural gas projects in USA. Now this particular signing of memorandum of understanding is set to strengthen the Indo-US energy cooperation and give a greater amount of fillip to the bilateral relationship between the two countries. Now this particular deal would benefit both USA as well as India, creating a win-win situation. With respect to USA, this particular investment to be undertaken by Petronet would lead to creation of around 50,000 direct and indirect jobs. It would also promote a greater amount of investment into 18 US states. With respect to significance of the deal for India, the government of India has come up with a vision of a natural gas based economy. Natural gas is considered to be much cleaner and environment friendly as compared to other fossil fuels such as the coal and oil. In this regard, the government of India has come up with a vision to increase the share of the natural gas in India's energy mix from 6% to 15%. So signing of this particular deal would enable India to have access to around 5 million tons of LNG per year, and hence such a deal would strengthen government's vision of a natural gas based economy. With respect to important details of the Indo-US energy cooperation, both India as well as USA are considered to be major consumers of energy, and hence both these countries believe that the energy cooperation can emerge as a central piece of their bilateral relationship. And accordingly, both these countries have established the Indo-US Strategic Energy Partnership. As part of the Strategic Energy Partnership, India and USA have decided to focus upon the various pillars of cooperation, these being cooperation in the field of oil and gas, energy efficiency, renewable energy, coal, as well as the nuclear energy. It is to be noted that the signing of Indo-US nuclear deal in the year 2008 in turn paved way for India to sign the civil nuclear deals with the other countries as well. Both these countries have also set up the US India Natural Gas Task Force so as to strengthen the strategic and economic relationship between the two countries. And in order to give a greater amount of thrust to clean and renewable energy, India and USA have set up the Partnership to Advance Clean Energy, which is also known as PACE. Further, in response to the economic sanctions on Iran, India's purchase of oil and gas from USA has doubled in the last year. And lastly, United States of America has made a rapid strides with respect to the shale gas exploration, wherein the shale gas presently accounts for almost around 33% of the electricity generation in USA. Now with respect to India, India has huge amount of shale gas reserves which can enable India to meet its natural gas demand for the next 25 years. However, the exploration of shale gas uses a very advanced technology which is referred to as the fracking technology, and hence India can use USA's technical expertise in the shale gas exploration. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 11. This particular article appears in the form of a data point and is titled as Home and the World. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of GS paper 1 under the subsection Population and Associated Issues. Recently, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs has recently published a report which is titled as the International Migration Stock 2019. This particular report highlights the various trends and patterns with respect to the international migration. It is to be noted that this particular report has been published based upon the official national statistics such as the population census published by various countries. In this regard, let us now look at some of the important highlights of this particular report. Now, this particular report highlights that the total number of international migrants as of 2019 presently stands at around 272 million, and this is considered to be 15% higher as compared to the total number of international migrants in the year 2010. So we can see that in the last one decade, there has been increase in the number of international migrants by almost around 15%. Further, with an estimated migrant population of around 51 million, the United States of America presently has the highest number of migrants in terms of absolute value. However, with almost around 88% of the population comprising of the migrants, the United Arab Emirates has the highest number of migrants in terms of percentage. And if you look at the region wise, majority of the migrants are concentrated in the regions of Europe followed by North America. Now with respect to the global migration into and from India, with respect to migration from India, India is considered to be a leading country in terms of number of migrants living outside India. Presently, as of 2019, it stands at around 17.5 million and it comprises of almost around 6.4% of the global migrants. And India is in turn followed by other countries such as Mexico, China and Bangladesh. And with respect to where do Indians migrate to, Indians typically migrate to countries such as UAE followed by US and Saudi Arabia. With respect to migration into India, the total number of migrants into India presently stands at around 5.1 million. And the major source country for the migrants into India are Bangladesh followed by Pakistan and Nepal. Now the migration from India to other countries is of considerable importance mainly because of two reasons. First and foremost, from an economic perspective, India receives the world's highest remittances of around $79 billion on an annual basis, and this comprises of around 3% of India's GDP. So the strong Indian diaspora in turn contributes to the economic growth and development of the Indian economy. Apart from that, the strong Indian diaspora has an important significance from the geopolitics angle as well. As the people of Indian origin rise in political, economic and social arena of their adopted country, they would in turn help in building strong relationship between India and their adopted countries. Now these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 8. The title of the article is Endosulfan Victims Send Notice to Kerala. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection General Issues on Environmental Ecology. In July 2019, the Supreme Court of India had ordered the Kerala government to pay the compensation amount to the victims of the endosulfan. However, the government of Kerala has failed to provide the compensation amount to the victims. In this regard, a legal notice has been sent to the government of Kerala. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we'll understand as to what exactly is the endosulfan, how it adversely impacts the environment and the human health, and what efforts are undertaken by the Indian government and the global community in order to ban the manufacture of the endosulfan. Endosulfan is basically an organochlorine insecticide sold under the trade name Theodan. This insecticide is usually sprayed on various crops such as cashew, cotton, fruits, tea, etc. Now the problem with respect to this particular endosulfan is that it is considered to be highly toxic to both insects as well as humans. In case of humans, the endosulfan can cause vomiting, nausea and breathing difficulties, and in extreme cases it can even lead to the death of the humans. More importantly, the endosulfan also displays a tendency of bioaccumulation. Now the bioaccumulation occurs when an organism absorbs a toxic substance at a rate which is considered to be much higher than the rate at which the toxic substance is lost through the excretion. Endosulfan also disrupts the functioning of the endocrine system, leading to the disruption in the production of hormones. It is also associated with reducing the fertility level of the people, and it also reduces the overall physical and cognitive development of the individuals. The use of endosulfan can also pose an adverse impact on the local biodiversity as well. Now, these problems related to the usage of endosulfan came to limelight in the year 2011 when a large number of people in the Kasaragod district of Kerala had got adversely impacted. So if you look at India's efforts to counter the usage of endosulfan, earlier India was considered to be one of the largest producer and consumers of endosulfan. However, when the Kasaragod issue came to the limelight, the Supreme Court of India imposed a ban on the manufacture, sale and usage of endosulfan in the year 2011. With respect to global efforts, endosulfan has been listed under the Stockholm Convention. It is to be noted that the Stockholm Convention basically aims to reduce the concentration of the persistent organic pollutants. Now, the persistent organic pollutants are considered to be those toxic substances that have a tendency to remain in the atmosphere for a longer period of time and also pose an adverse impact on the human health. This particular convention seeks to eliminate around 12 persistent organic pollutants, including the endosulfan. On similar lines, endosulfan has also been listed under the Rotterdam Convention on Prior Informed Consent. It is to be noted that under the Rotterdam Convention, any country which is exporting a material which could pose an adverse impact to the biodiversity is required to inform the importing country as per the provisions of the Rotterdam Convention. So the Rotterdam Convention basically facilitates the exchange of information among the member countries of this particular convention. The next article appears on page number 9. The title of the article is Ayurvedic Pain Therapy Gets a Northeastern Twist with Chili. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection General Science. Now this particular article here highlights that Dr. Imli Kumba Jameer, who is working as an Ayush practitioner in India, has recently altered the mainstream Ayurvedic pain relief therapy by using the Naga chili and the betel leaf. And this particular revised Ayurvedic pain relief therapy has got the recent approval of the Ministry of Ayush. In case of Ayurveda, a pungent paste known as the Shula Prashanama is used as a pain relief therapy. So what this Ayush practitioner has actually done is that he has altered this particular paste by adding Naga chili and the betel leaf. And the addition of Naga chili and betel leaf has in turn increased the pungency of this particular paste, leading to an improved or a modified version of the existing Ayurvedic pain relief therapy. This particular modified pain relief therapy has led to a considerable reduction in the pain as well as swelling in the patients. However, in some of the patients, it has caused the irritation as well as itching. Now, with respect to your prelims, you should be aware about the Naga chili. It is to be noted that in the local language, the Naga chili is referred to as the Bhot Jolokia. And the significance of this particular chili is that in the year 2007, the Guinness Book of World Records had registered Bhot Jolokia as the hottest chili in the world. However, Bhot Jolokia lost its position to Infinity Chili from UK subsequently. Now, as to why this particular plant becomes important is because if you look at the previous year prelims questions, questions have been normally asked with respect to the important medicinal plants and herbs in India. For example, in the prelims 2012, there was a question related to the Seabug thorn, whereas in the prelims 2019, there was a question related to the Himalayan nettle. It is to be noted that the Seabug thorn is a shrub that grows in the dry temperate and cold desert of the Himalayas. It has a multi-purpose medicinal and nutritional properties. It is also useful for the soil conservation and nitrogen fixation. It is also considered to be an ideal plant to combat the desertification. The most important significance of this particular plant is that every part of the plant, that is the root, fruit, leaf as well as thorn, are traditionally used as a medicine. Because of this particular reason, the Seabug thorn is also referred to as the wonder plant. And in order to promote the cultivation of the Seabug thorn, the Government of India has launched the National Seabug Thorn Initiative. So if you look at the options which are given here, both option number 1 as well as 3 here are correct, whereas option number 2 and 4 are wrong. And accordingly, the correct answer to this particular question is C, that is 1 and 3 only. Now coming to the question which was asked in the prelims 2019, the question here was, recently there was a growing awareness in the country about the importance of Himalayan nettle because it is found to be a sustainable source of, and the answer to this particular question is D, that is textile fiber. Now the next article appears on page number 1. The title of the article is Cannabis High for Manipur Startup Dream. Now this particular article highlights that the state government of Manipur is contemplating on legalizing the cultivation of cannabis. The Chief Minister of Manipur has highlighted that legalizing cannabis can boost the local economy and it can also help the people who are suffering from paralysis. Now the legalization of cannabis cultivation has both benefits as well as problems. And this particular aspect related to the legalization of cannabis cultivation has been comprehensively discussed in our DNS dated 22nd of August 2019. So I suggest you to go through this particular DNS so as to know all the aspects related to the legalization of cannabis cultivation. And please note that the link to this particular DNS has been provided in the description box below for your reference. Based upon our video analysis, these 4 questions shall be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answers to these 4 questions. We shall be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The first question here is, which among the following are part of the nationally determined contributions announced by India as part of the Paris climate change deal? The first option here is reduce the emission intensity of its GDP by 33 to 35% by 2030 from the 2005 levels. This option here is correct. The second option reads as to achieve 25% electric power installed capacity from the non-fossil fuels. Now this particular option here is wrong. This is because as part of the nationally determined contribution, India has set a target of achieving 40% electric power installed capacity from the non-fossil fuels. So if you look at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this particular question shall be A, that is 1 only. Now coming to the second question, the question here is, consider the following pairs of environmental conventions or protocol and their agenda. The first option here is Stockholm Convention, persistent organic pollutants. This particular option here is correct as we have discussed. The second option reads as Basel Convention and the agenda is protection of ozone layer. Now this particular option here is wrong. This is because a Basel Convention deals with the transboundary movement of the hazardous substances and their disposal, whereas it is the Vienna Convention which deals with the protection of the ozone layer. And under this particular Vienna Convention, we have the Montreal Protocol on the substances that lead to the depletion of the ozone layer. The third option reads as Cartagena Protocol. It is to be noted that the Cartagena Protocol is a protocol under the Convention on Biological Diversity, and it basically deals with regulating the import and export of the living modified organisms so as to protect the biodiversity. So if you look at the options which are given here, both option number 1 and 3 here are correct. So accordingly, the correct answer to this particular question shall be C. Coming now to the third question, the question here is, consider the following statements related to the global migration trends. The first statement here is, India is a leading country of origin and destination of the international migrants. Now this particular option here is wrong. This is because India is leading country of the origin of the international migrants, and it is not the destination of the international migrants. Rather, it is the United States of America which attracts the highest number of international migrants in terms of absolute number. The second option reads as USA has the highest number of international migrants in terms of the percentage of its population. Even this particular statement here is wrong. This is because USA has the highest number of international migrants in terms of absolute number. However, it is the UAE which has the highest number of international migrants in terms of the percentage of its population. So if you look at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this particular question shall be D. Now coming to last question, the question here is, consider the following statements related to the Bhot Jolokia chili which was in the news recently. The first statement here is, it is predominantly grown in the higher altitude regions of Himalayas. Now this particular statement here is wrong. The Bhot Jolokia chili is predominantly grown in the northeastern part of India, typically in the state of Nagaland. The second option reads as, it is a medicinal form of plant and it is used in the field of Ayurveda. This particular statement, as we have discussed, is correct. So accordingly, the correct answer to this particular question is B. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now let us have a look at the question for the day.